Hey, I'm Shay Warner, and you are listening to Casual Cattle Conversations. If you are ready to explore different management practices and focus on improving your operation and the beef industry, this is the podcast for you. Welcome to the show. I'm so excited you are listening. Hey folks, have I told you about my favorite app to manage all of the data for our cow herd? We made the switch to Breeder, and it is saving us hours. From basic inventory management to calving records, treatments, reminders, weights, running reports, and exploring different marketing avenues for your calves, Breeder has you covered. One of the best parts is they also work with multiple supply chains to offer alternative marketing outlets for your cattle. We can then choose to get carcass data back on our calves to help us make informed breeding choices for the next year. To learn more, head to their website, breeder.co. That's BREEDR.co, and the link is in the show notes. Why did you choose to start NoDak Meats?
So I ended up starting it based on local demands of the local guys here. Being new to Steele, I ended up running around and getting to know a couple farmers, and they all said the same thing. You know, they didn't recognize who I was. So then I introduced myself, told them I was cutting meat at the time, that they needed a local processor, and that, you know, wait times were so long that they had to, you know, drive the animal so far in order to get it done on a timely manner. So with so many people saying the same thing, the light bulb kind of went off to pursue it a little bit harder and, you know, get the financing available or in line as what I could, and with a little help from the city of Steele. And then the state of North Dakota also pitched in a little bit to make it happen, and here we are.
So you were cutting meat prior to this, or what did life look like prior to you starting this venture?
Yeah, so actually going through high school and college, I had nothing to do with cutting meat except other than, you know, deer kills and stuff like that with cutting with dad and family and brothers and stuff. I pursued a different thing in college, and then it came through a few years after college. I ended up cutting meat on Fridays with a 4-day work week and enjoyed it. I really liked it, and the day went by really fast. So I ended up pursuing that all week, or as a full-time job, and I learned from an older gentleman that's been doing it for 53 years, and knew every trick in the book. I mean, it was, you do this because you do this, and this happens because of that. And it was all kinds of good training that he provided me. So I carried on with that and actually liked it. And then after making the move from Minnesota out here to Steele, and then that's kind of how that snowball started rolling and got into this.
So did you have any connection to Steele outside of hunting in the area?
No, it was kind of a unique story how it came together. I met a gal back in Minnesota, and her parents were actually from Hazen, North Dakota, and Fort Yates, and they were kind of in the retirement setting of coming back to North Dakota to retire. So with that being said, I like to hunt out here. Our family came out here and hunted when I was younger, so it didn't really seem very bizarre, and we ended up following her job here in Bismarck and looking at a house in Steele, Bismarck, and Washburn, and then that's how we ended up buying a house in Steele and ended up in Steele. There was really no rhyme or reason to come here, but it's a good place. So
it is a good town. I guess It's my hometown, but yeah. Maybe, sometimes you have different feelings about your hometown than people who move in, but it's a good community. And I know I actually used to live not far from right where we're recording this today in your facilities, just around the corner, and it was cool to watch this building make progress as you were building it and getting started. So we're recording this in April of 2024.
Right.
When did you open officially?
So we actually started building. They poured concrete on the 4th of July, or the weekend of the 4th of July, and it took about 5 months to complete. It was actually very fast. It's a pretty simple building in general, but then it went up fairly fast, and I ended up started killing beef just before Christmas. Make sure my setup worked and everything, you know, went smoothly. And the first couple were unique. I made some tweaks and some adjustments to the slaughter floor and some different things. I did not have it nailed down by any means. But then, officially opening in the 8th of January, so I've been doing it for now 3 months here and getting a routine down, and I've done about 65 animals so far. That's where we're at.
What's your capacity for how many animals you can do at a time or hang?
So being this facility specifically can probably hold at one time about 40-ish animals, and that's being in quarters in beef. With other hogs, of course, would fit as well, but 40 animals or so in the coolers at one time, for storage reasons. And then the freezer can hold a few too, but you can really only slaughter as many animals as you can cut up during the week, because it's all a system. That's why they call it processing. It is a process of whatever you can cut up in one day is what you can technically kill in one day. So if you can only cut up 2 beef in one day with the help that you have is about what you're limited to kill per day or per week for the facility. So
how long are you able to let carcasses hang if people want like a longer hang time?
Yeah, so depending if the animal is grass-fed or grain finished. Grass-fed animals I like to cut up right at the 2-week mark or even before, with no fat cap on the outside. That meat starts to age faster, and actually that age will penetrate the outside of the carcass a little bit more and create kind of a black aging. It's just an oxidization thing that the carcass goes through, and that outside layer of meat doesn't taste good. So when the processor gets it out onto the floor, they have to cut that off. And the longer you let a grass-fed animal hang, just the more you lose. Now, with a grain-finished animal with a fat cap on the outside or a fatty animal, that I'll hang at least 2 weeks, if not 3. Anything over 3 is okay. It still works. You can hang them for a month or even longer if you really have the right setup and the right humidity. Moisture is always an issue in facilities or coolers, as the actual carcass is losing moisture as it's aging. So there's some things to work out there, but I like to do 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay. So you mentioned earlier that, after your first couple animals, it was a learning curve. You made some tweaks and adjustments after that. What were some of those tweaks and adjustments?
So the first couple were actually the actual kill chute. The animal comes off the trailer from the farmer, goes into a chute, and then comes up to a head gate. And I compensated that chute to be about 32 inches wide, or almost 34 inches wide, which is about 6 inches too wide. A beef animal, even a big, large beef animal, is actually narrower than what a person thinks or what they can fit through. I compensated for that, and now some of these smaller animals, there's too much space going on, and it's giving the cattle too much option to be a pain, basically. Some of the other stuff was my crane hoist worked just fine. It's on an I-beam, and basically the trolley does not lock, so I had to put in a brace for that in order to pull the animal out onto the skinning cradle. That was just a simple adjustment, but that was probably about it, I guess, so far.
So what would you say your biggest challenge was overall with getting this whole business started?
Probably the beginning of it was just the financing. I mean, everybody's going to have trouble with financing because it's a larger dollar amount, especially being younger. There was a lot of hoops to jump through in a couple different agencies and banks and stuff that an average person goes to do something like this and start a business. And it overall in the end it worked out really well. Just the way that it came together, and interest rates and financing and stuff is very important in a small business in order to make that work financially. And yeah, simple as that. Is the hardest part was probably the financing, and then once those grants came through, and utilizing your resources is a big one for anybody starting a business. Is utilize resources. Don't just necessarily go to a bank and try to find the funding. There is other outside investors and resources and stuff that you can use, even nonprofit agencies that will help you pursue something that you're trying to get after.
Thank you for sharing that. I know that's actually a topic that I've had on the show before, is there are alternative funding options outside of just traditional bank loans. Right.
It's more than a guy thinks. Yeah.
What about the labor standpoint? How many employees do you have here? What does that look like? And was it a challenge to find workers?
Yeah, so being in a rural setting, that I kind of expected help to be an issue. Of course, in today's world and the labor markets, it's very difficult in a rural area, and I kind of designed this place to start out being a one-man team. Myself running it for now is actually the only help that I have, except an exceptional couple part-timers that came in and do come in and help debone and grind burger and process kind of a couple days a week. There are some farmers that are, not necessarily active in the winter time when everything's frozen, so they do assist a little bit, and that's pretty much it. I mean, it's definitely a challenge being a one-man show.
Hey ranchers, which topic interests you the most? Adding value to your calf, cover crops, finding and retaining employees or interns, improving business management, or maybe even creating multiple revenue sources for your ranch? All of these are conversations that we have had or are planning to have on RancherMinds this year. RancherMinds is a group of cattle producers who meet online once a month to visit with industry experts during small group Q&A sessions. The small groups make sure your questions get addressed, and the recordings ensure you never miss a thing, even if the cows get out. You can join us from the pasture, field, office, or vehicle. If you're interested in learning more, head to my website and use the Contact Us feature, and I'll email you back. So with that, you were talking about beef a lot, obviously, because this is a cattle podcast, but what other animals are you open to processing here?
Yeah, so I've done a few hogs. That's kind of basic. And, this the time of year, opening in January, deer season is over and wild game season is pretty much over. I haven't gotten into too much retail of that side of it yet. There's some licensing and paperwork stuff has to be done still. And that's probably another big challenge of starting the place is the paperwork that's in line for the government agencies in order to do what you want to do. It's not necessarily just throw together products and get them out the door. Everything is kind of monitored by the state and even federal government. So there's some challenges there. As far as other animals, no, it's just been primarily beef and a few hogs at this point. I do not process any sheep, lamb, goats, that stuff. It's kind of tedious work and I'm not completely set up for it. So
you are USDA inspected?
Yes and no. So this plant is actually state of North Dakota Department of Ag inspected, but it's actually equal to USDA regulations. Mm-hmm. So everything comes down from USDA or federal government. The state Department of Ag is actually audited, and their bosses, the federal government, make sure that they're employing these rules and food safety things to owners like me in places like this. So yeah, it's state inspected at this point.
Do you want to work towards that full USDA inspection label, even though usually state inspection can be strict, is always equal to federal inspection, if not stricter, depending on the state? Are you still going to work towards that federal inspection? Federal
is, and I haven't been exposed to it yet, actually, to know it in and out, but federal inspection is actually somewhat simpler than state inspection. The staffing issue from the federal government is its own thing, but that's kind of on them. And it depends what your plant really runs through. If it's daily, if it's weekly, or you only want an inspector there monthly. Yeah.
Okay. So obviously one of your services you provide is the processing of animals. What else do you provide? Because I see some retail options up front here.
Right. So NoDak Meats here in a rural setting, we offer just the basic custom processing is kind of the big one. That's the biggest demand. Next would be like an emergency kill, basically broken legs or animals that are still ambulatory due to regulations. The animal has to be up and walking in order to consume it or to butcher it and process it. And I think that's a federal rule. So other than emergency kills, we also do go to the farm for those people that do on the farm butchering. We'll take care of the animal right there with a little help of the farmer. And then lastly would be a little bit of retail. I got the pork and beef cuts at all times, the patties, the burgers, the steaks, roast, stew meat, cube steak, all that various stuff. So,
what's been the community's reaction overall to what you've opened up and have been providing over the last few months?
I would say curiosity. I mean, once something in a small town pops up, everybody's kind of nosy. Everybody wants to know what it looks like and what's going on here. Other than that, I think a lot of people are happy. They're happy the service is here, that it's close and not 50 miles away. They are proud. I think they want to be able to have this here in town, and it seems like the community would or will help when it's needed. So
good. So now that you've been doing this for a few months now, when you think about the process from start to finish, whether that's first visiting with a potential client all the way up through processing that animal and getting that animal back to them, what is the most challenging part of that process?
I think so far would just be the help. Being a one-man team, it presents its own challenges in a timely way. Everything, once the animal is killed, it's got a timeline to when that carcass can be processed. It's kind of sets a lot of deadlines, trying to get things done and in time before something either spoils or the food safety, as far as bacteria or mold or something spreading in the building, and just staying on top of the overall cleanliness is a lot of work. But I think the biggest one with that would just be help.
Okay, Scott. So I'm curious, when we talk about processing meat, we think about the steaks, we think about the burger, we think about the roasts, but what about some of those byproducts or the rendering process? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, so other than just the primary goodies of an animal, there is all the offal or the organ meat on a beef specifically, and pork. The tongue, the heart, the tail, the liver, those kind of things actually are very consumable, and some people are sought after that. It seems to be more typically the older generation and then the younger. However, that stuff ends up, from this plant, it all ends up in a trailer and then ends up composting rurally outside of town. That compost then just breaks down over time, and it's utilized by the farmer for actual fertilizer. It turns into kind of a mulch. Once it dries out and it's ready to go, the farmer can utilize it.
Okay. So back to that whole process and the most challenging part of, working with your clients from start to finish, what's something that cattle producers can do to communicate better, build up a strong relationship so that you still want to work with them?
Yeah, so one hurdle I've noticed already is communication between not necessarily the farmer and the processor, but the farmer and the customer. Let the customer know, if the customer can't get out to the farm and see the animal, that you sold privately, is communicate with them on what they're getting. Are they getting a grass-fed animal? Or are they getting a grain-finished animal? What's the age and the sex of the animal? There's a lot of different aspects there of the quality of the animal. When the customer just comes to pick up meat and write the check, they want to know what they're getting. They don't want some surprise, grass-fed animal if they're used to a grain finish, or vice versa. And then also, communication when the animal is dropped off, if it is sold privately, is to have the names and the phone numbers of who that animal is sold to and the amount of that animal that they're taking to the processor right there. It eliminates a lot of hurdles and miscommunications, and actually legally you're supposed to. Bring that animal, when you bring that animal here, have it spoken for. That leaves the processor in line with regulations and alleviates a lot of hurdles.
So with that, what other communication factors can ranchers do with their customers, whether that's so that the customer understands how much meat they can expect to get back, or anything along maybe some of those common misunderstandings?
Yeah, so there's, in general with cattle specifically, there's some standards that processors usually follow, which comes down to an actual percentage of an animal. So if an animal is weighed out, which is pretty typical, that the customer and the farmer both charge well, the farmer charges, the processor charges on rail weight, which is actual hanging weight of the carcass animal after it's been slaughtered. Some people don't know that, and they don't know what that is. And it's usually a percentage of beef, is usually 60 to 64% or so of the hanging weight is your take-home meat. Well, when that hanging weight carcass is actually in the cooler, it's already losing weight. It's losing moisture and it's starting to dry out, so it's actually losing weight before we even cut it up. Once we cut up, you have to figure in all the weight, whether you take boneless cuts, if you take bone-in cuts, how fatty the animal was. There's a lot of different variables that affect how much take-home meat you even take home off of that hanging weight. So besides the bone and the fat and the different stuff that we throw away on the processing floor, there's still other things that's what gets you down to the 60%. That 40% basically ends up in the barrel and goes out the door. So if you ever end up with far less than that, if you have a 400-pound half that you paid for at the processor and you only get 100 pounds of meat back, that's a percentage issue, and you can look at that right away and go, that's way less than 50%. It should be about 60. Now that's just kind of a general USDA guideline, is the 60%. Now if you have a bull, a butcher bull, that's going to weigh out probably at almost 70%. If you have a really fat open heifer, that some of these guys that are selling, you might be down all the way to 47%. So there's a little bit of variable from 60%, but 60% is your guideline.
Are there any other misconceptions that you hear from customers that you...
Yeah, so when a customer takes it home, from the processor, and they're putting it back in their freezer, and they go, oh, I only had so many steaks, I only had this many roasts. Well, take into factor of how large was the half or the animal that you bought to begin with. Secondly would be even how thick were your cuts. Do you have smaller cuts, steaks that are 3/4 of an inch, you're going to end up with more steaks on an animal. If you have steaks that are 1.5 inches thick, you're not going to end up with that many steaks. So just take into consideration of actually how you requested the animal, as a customer standpoint, of how much meat you got back on that.
So what advice do you have for anyone else who is thinking about starting their own processing operation in a small town?
I would say really think it through. It's definitely a commitment, physically, mentally, it can be draining. And then of course financially, you're committed for a while financially. And it is a prideful job. There's, when people come to pick up and they're happier than a chicken to pick up their meat. That is a rewarding part of the job, and that's kind of what I pursued this for. But it does take a toll on your body over time. Hopefully by the time I'm 50, I can still walk and talk. But it's just think about it and make sure everything your gut says that it's good to go, and before you actually sign on the dotted line.
And that's a wrap on that one, folks. Thank you for tuning in today and joining in on the conversation. Be sure to take this a step further and take the advice you learned and implement it on your operation. If you want to have a conversation about it, head over to my social media and send me a DM by following @CattleConvos and connecting with me there. Have a great day.